Bitcoin this week went over 30K. In fact, it kind of bounced up and down quite a few times as there were some false reports, of course, earlier that Bitcoin ETFs were approved. Of course, we found out later on down the line that that wasn't necessarily true, and that was a misreport, and it caused huge spikes on on Bitcoin. This brings up the question of, if an ETF is approved prior to the halving, could we see an early start to the Bitcoin bull run, and this, or the crypto bull run in general, right? And this is something that's been brought up quite a few different times. What breaks Bitcoin out of the traditional cycle? For those that are unaware, Bitcoin's been on a 4-year cycle since its inception. This cycle basically is based around the halving of Bitcoin, and the next halving is in April of 2024. Typically what you'll see is the halving take place and accumulation start to build up for the next 6 months. About 6 to 9 months after the halving happens, what you see is a huge spike in the price of Bitcoin, which is caused by basically fear of missing out by retail investors that don't understand the cycle of Bitcoin. The actual pricing of Bitcoin is most of the time correlated, to the cost to mint Bitcoin. And the reason the halving affects this is because the halving is basically cutting the rewards miners get from transactions on the blockchain or solving a block in half. So this next time, for example, it's going to go from 6 Bitcoin to about 3 Bitcoin, or 3.25, somewhere around there. So what you see, of course, is that price go up due to that. And then people see the price of Bitcoin go up. They think that Bitcoin's going to go up forever, and they invest, and it goes way up into the ether, to the moon, right? Like we saw previously. And what happens eventually is people realize that this is more what the actual value of Bitcoin is, and it comes back down to cost to mint, and sometimes a little bit below that. And this is basically what we've seen since the inception of Bitcoin, this 4-year cycle play out. So from my perspective, I always plan around the 4-year cycle. I don't necessarily plan around other things outside of this, but it is important to bring up the fact that with the ETF coming into play, what we would see is a bunch of investors that are not familiar with the 4-year cycle, which could cause some FOMO into Bitcoin. And then what would be really interesting, of course, is if we see these approved and the price of Bitcoin goes up before the halving, we could see kind of a culmination of events that cause some sort of up period that lasts a lot longer than it traditionally has, which would be very awesome considering the fact that we've seen a downturn that's lasted quite a bit longer than it typically does. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section and the live stream below. There is an article here covering, of course, the jump over 30K referencing on CoinDesk, the ETF hopes. And it says Bitcoin forks led alternative token gains in the past 24 hours, outpacing major tokens. Bitcoin crossed the $30,000 mark during the morning hours on Friday, extending its weekly gains to over 11% as bullish sentiments around a possible spot Bitcoin exchange traded fund, ETF for short, approval in the US gained momentum. Tokens formed by the forking of Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, and Bitcoin SV jumped as much as 26% to lead gains among alternative tokens is in a sign of possible irrational exuberance, which is what I would attribute this to, right? Irrational exuberance. And the thing is everybody that's been participating, I think, within cryptocurrency for a long time is very aware of the 4-year cycle. You kind of see this start to happen. And I think it's a hint of what happens when adoption of cryptocurrency goes beyond the people that are educated on cryptocurrency. We saw a huge adoption rate, of course, surrounding NFTs, etc., in the last bull run that brought a lot of people that are not traditionally in the crypto space into crypto. And a lot of them felt like they got burned. There were a lot of scams that happened in that particular case, and it basically put a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths. But we did see kind of what happens when normies get into cryptocurrency. And I think we see, like, obviously this irrationality of people that want to get into cryptocurrency that will drive the price up without actually understanding the dynamics of the actual what the price is driven by. I mean, we see this a lot of times across the board, especially in shit coins or in altcoins, right? Where people don't understand the cost to mint and they drive the price of these tokens that are worthless, or even projects that are not worth as much, to an extreme high. So there is always this kind of balance game where, like, there is something to be said for jumping on a train early, even if it's not worth a lot, just so that you can make a lot of money off of it. It's kind of like that Ponzi scheme aspect of it, or that pyramid scheme aspect of cryptocurrency that you can, make money off of, ironically, right? And it's kind of funny like that. Earlier this week, 4 House Financial Services Committee members urged the SEC to listen to the courts and give up efforts to block Bitcoin ETFs from regulatory approval in a letter to SEC Chair Gary Gensler. Elsewhere, hopes of the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust being converted into an ETF riled up some traders. GBTC is one of the largest institutional Bitcoin holdings, and Grayscale is among several other asset managers who have applied for a Bitcoin spot ETF. Other major firms in the race include BlackRock, of course, Fidelity, and WisdomTree. Meanwhile, traders said a ruling in Grayscale's favor could tilt overall sentiment bullish and even set the bedrock for a broader market climb. Quote, Bitcoin has also been encouraged by possible ETF approval and an increasing number of ETF submissions by leading companies, shared Lucy Hugh, senior trader at MetAlpha, in a message early Friday. Quote, the SEC opted for a no appeal on Grayscale's ruling, and as the deadline for Bitcoin spot ETF applications from institutions such as BlackRock looms closer, the market's confidence in ETF approval has increased, end quote. With the Bitcoin ETF approval and halving event in April, the crypto market could kickstart a very robust bull market, Hugh added. And this is the question that I have. If you have an ETF approval here by the end of the year, or even early into 2024, that causes an uptick in the price of Bitcoin in general, that will raise all ships in the rest of the crypto market, of course. And then that would flow into the natural cycle of Bitcoin going up after the halving in April. We could see basically an unprecedented bull run that starts earlier, meaning I could definitely see a bull run that starts basically in April at the halving of Bitcoin, as opposed to further into the cycle, like the 6 to 9 months after the halving that we typically see, because usually the accumulation period starts after the halving, right? So you would see April happen, accumulation period for the next 6 to 9 months, and then the euphoria as other outside retail investors come into Bitcoin once again in fears of missing out on the profitability of investing in Bitcoin. But if that starts earlier, with accumulation being kickstarted by the ETF, I do think that we could see basically a breakout of the traditional cycle of Bitcoin. Once again, is this something that you could see happening? Let me know in the comment section. That would obviously be awesome, because that would basically, it could be bad or good, right? So let me put it this way. From my perspective in general, my entire plan is to continue to accumulate just as I would through the typical cycle, meaning my accumulation period would be cut short, so I wouldn't have as much of a boost, right? So for example, miners are at an all-time low right now. If we go to the ASIC hash rate index, right, we can get these old S19s for as cheap as they've ever been, right? Like it's absolutely insane. We are seeing $5 per terahash prices for 38 to 68 joules per terahash. And that is cheap as dirt, which means right now I have the best opportunity to accumulate as much hardware as possible in the Bitcoin mining space of things, and be pretty certain that that will go back up, right? Just because we've seen this, like I said, every 4 years. So my accumulation period gets cut short, unfortunately. But on the flip side of that, of course, it does put me in a position where, combined with, of course, the crypto YouTube channel and the mining, etc., I could have quite a bit of good profitability starting earlier, which is definitely welcome. I just wouldn't have as much equipment and as much power deployed as I would prefer, or as I have planned out for the next cycle. So those are kind of the pros and cons of this starting earlier. I'd like to hear your thoughts and opinions too. Would you like this to start earlier, or would you like it to start later? Do you feel like you've accumulated enough to be ready for the next bull run in cryptocurrency, or do you feel like you still really want to accumulate quite a bit more? And that's definitely like kind of the pros and cons surrounding it. Thanks for checking out this clip from the Crypto Mining Show. You can check out the full episode here or more crypto content down here. Also, I'd like you to check out my locals page at sonofatech.locals.com, where you can become a member for free or choose to be a $5 a month supporter that unlocks additional content.